The morning of my daughter's first birthday, I was in our kitchen at 6:30, trying to tie ribbon bows around the necks of mason jars we'd been collecting since January, and I let myself think the words I hadn't allowed myself all week. We actually pulled this off. My name is Phoebe. I'm 34 years old, and that small moment of relief, bare feet on kitchen tile, Clara still asleep in her crib, the smell of coffee and the sound of my husband Eli loading folding tables into his truck out front, was the last calm I would feel for the next several hours. I didn't know that yet. I just stood there with my ribbon and my mason jars and my 11 times revised party timeline printed on the refrigerator. And I let myself feel good about it for a little while. Our daughter turned 1 on a Saturday in early October. We'd been planning her party since June, which I know sounds excessive for a child who will have no memory of the event, but here's the thing I've come to believe. You don't throw a first birthday party for the child. You throw it for yourself and for the people who kept you alive during the year that made you into a parent. The ones who brought meals the first week, who texted at 2 in the morning with no expectation of a response, who showed up when Clara was still small enough to fall asleep on a forearm. I wanted to say thank you in a room with food and flowers and a cake worth looking at. I'd found the venue in July. Birchwood Grill, a family-owned restaurant about 20 minutes from our house, with a private patio room that held 40 people comfortably and opened onto a small garden. The event coordinator, Kim, answered every email I sent within the hour. I put down a deposit the same week I toured the room. I signed a contract. We settled on a color palette, sage and cream and warm ivory, and I ordered pressed flower balloon clusters from an Etsy shop in Vermont and a hand-lettered welcome sign from a calligrapher a coworker recommended and a custom cake from a bakery 2 towns over. White buttercream. Gold leaf script spelling out 1. A border of dried wildflowers pressed flat like little fossils. I'd found the cake stand at a thrift store in September and painted it gold myself on a Saturday afternoon while Clara napped. I had a photographer booked. A playlist Eli and I had built together over 2 evenings. A printed timeline broken into 15-minute increments. A photo display with 12 frames, 1 picture of Clara from each month of her first year. I had printed activity cards for the kids' table and ordered custom cookies from the same bakery, small sugar cookies shaped like bears and flowers with sage-colored frosting, that we planned to box up as favors. I had been to Birchwood twice to check the room layout and once to confirm the catering menu. I had done everything. That was not vanity, that was just the truth. The only thing I hadn't planned on was my mother-in-law. Miriam is not a malicious person. I've spent a lot of time sitting with that, and I keep arriving back at it. She is a person who loves fiercely and controls quietly, and has never once stopped to examine whether those 2 things are compatible. She'd been making small comments since August. The venue was a little informal for such an occasion. The pressed flower balloon clusters were a lot going on. She mentioned once and very pleasantly that she knew a woman from her book club who did party florals for a fraction of what I'd probably spent, and when I smiled and said we were all set, she nodded and didn't bring it up again. I thought she'd let it go. I would not find out until the morning of the party that she had not let it go at all. That instead of letting it go, she had been making phone calls. Eli and I pulled into Birchwood's parking lot at 10:15, 2 hours before the first guests were due. Clara was in the back seat in her white eyelet dress, already chewing on one of her birthday-themed shoe straps. Eli had the truck loaded, extra chairs, the welcome sign wrapped in brown paper, 3 canvas bags full of supplies, the gold cake stand. Kim was supposed to meet us at the patio room entrance at 10 o'clock. A server I had never seen before opened the door instead. She had a very specific expression. I've thought about it since. It was the expression of someone who has been dreading a conversation all morning and has now run out of time. I registered that face half a second before I looked past her into the room, and then I looked into the room and I stopped walking. The tables were wrong. Instead of the round, family-style arrangement I'd diagrammed with Kim in August, they were in long, formal rows. The kind you see at a rehearsal dinner or a corporate lunch. The centerpieces weren't mine. Tall glass vases, white lilies, silver ribbon curled at the bases. The balloon arch, standing in the far corner, was white and silver. I had not ordered white and silver. I had ordered sage and cream. The palette I'd built for 7 months, the fabric swatches, the color-matched ribbons, the hand-painted cake stand, was nowhere in that room. And at the display table by the garden window, where my cake should have been sitting on my gold stand, there was a different cake entirely. 3 tiers. White fondant, a silver number 1 on the top, clean and expensive and not mine. My cake was on a folding table near the kitchen entrance, slightly to the left of a mop bucket. I turned around slowly to look at Eli. He was still in the doorway with his arms full of canvas bags and a look on his face that I'd never seen before. I turned back to the server and asked her where Kim was. Kim came from the back office 2 minutes later. She had the look of someone who had been rehearsing an apology and was now delivering it. She took me to the corner of the room, away from the server, and she told me in a low and careful voice that on Thursday, 2 days before the party, she had received a phone call from a woman who identified herself as the grandmother and said she'd been authorized to make adjustments on our behalf. The woman had described the original contract in specific detail. She'd known the room capacity, the catering package, the original layout. Kim had assumed she had a copy of the paperwork. She'd made the changes, because in 8 years of coordinating private events at Birchwood, she had never had a grandmother call with that level of detail and be wrong about her authority to use it. The woman had provided a credit card for the upgraded florals and the replacement cake. I stood very still for a long moment. Then I asked Kim to please move my cake back to the display table, and she nodded quickly, and I walked back across the room to where Eli was still standing, and I said, quietly, "Your mother called the venue and changed the contract." He looked at me, he looked at the room, he said, "I know." And then, because neither of us said anything else, we went and started moving my cake ourselves. We were still moving it. Eli carrying the stand, me carrying the cake box with both hands like it was made of glass, when Miriam arrived. She came through the patio door at 10:45, 20 minutes earlier than she'd said she'd be, wearing a cream blazer and carrying a large canvas tote. She looked around the room she'd redesigned and took a long, satisfied breath. Then she saw me and opened her arms. "Phoebe," she said, and pulled me into a hug. "Doesn't it all look wonderful? I knew it needed something a little more elevated. You've been so stretched thin with Clara this year, I just wanted to take a few things off your plate." She held my shoulders and looked at me warmly. "You can relax today. Everything's handled." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "You called Kim and changed the contract." She tilted her head slightly. "I called to add a few things, yes. A little polish. I thought you'd be pleased when you saw it." I would have said more right then, but Bex walked in. Bex is my closest friend. She'd offered to come early to help set up, and she came through the door at 10:50 with a hostess gift and a tray of mini quiches she'd made herself, took one look at me, took one look at the room, and said, "Okay, garden, 1 minute." She handed the quiches to Eli, took me by the elbow, and walked me outside. Standing in the garden in the October air, she told me that Miriam had called her the previous Tuesday asking about the guest list. Who was coming? How many from Eli's side? How many from mine? Whether the seating would be mixed or kept separate. Were there any dietary restrictions she should know about? Bex had thought she was being a conscientious grandmother who wanted to know where to sit. She hadn't told me because she knew I'd been stressed about the party, and she hadn't wanted to add to it. "I'm sorry," Bex said. "If I'd known." "You didn't know," I said. She was careful about that. We stood there for a moment in the cold air. "Do you want to handle it now or after?" Bex asked. I didn't have to think about it for long. "Now," I said. "Because she's already in there greeting people like she owns the room. And if I wait until after, it will have already been the story of the day." We went back inside. The next 40 minutes were the slow version of the disaster. The kind where the temperature rises so gradually you almost adjust to it before it becomes unbearable. Guests began arriving at 11. Miriam positioned herself near the patio door, greeting people by name, accepting compliments on the decor, guiding people to seats in the rows she'd ordered. I watched her press something into a guest's hands, a small folded card. Then another guest. Then 2 more near the door. I crossed the room and picked one up from the table where a small stack of them sat. It was a printed program, 4 pages, tri-folded, silver script on the cover. Clara's first birthday celebration. On the front, a photo of Clara that I recognized immediately. I'd posted it on Facebook in August. Clara in a sunset in the backyard. Inside, a party timeline, the catering menu, a short paragraph about Clara's first year that Miriam had apparently written herself. And on the back panel, in italics, centered like a caterer's business card. Curated with love by Miriam, Clara's grandmother. I folded the program in half and held it. Eli appeared at my shoulder. I handed it to him without a word. He read it. His jaw tightened. He said quietly, "Okay." By 11:40, almost everyone had arrived. The room was full and warm and loud in the good way. Children shrieking at the kids' table, Clara being passed between relatives and laughing at the ceiling fans, the smell of food coming from the kitchen. Under any other circumstances, it would have felt like exactly what I'd wanted. But I could feel the shape of what was about to happen. Because Miriam was moving toward the head of the long, formal table she'd ordered, and she was picking up a fork, and she was tapping it against the side of her wine glass. The room settled. "I just want to say a few words," she said, "while everyone's together." She smiled. Easy, unhurried, the smile of someone standing in a room they believe belongs to them. I have been thinking about today for the entire year. From the moment I knew Clara was coming into our lives, I began imagining what this day could be. The flowers, the cake, the space. I wanted everything to be exactly right for her. Because some moments, she paused, deserve to be done properly. She wasn't finished. She drew breath to continue. But I was already standing up. I don't know if it was a decision, exactly. My body made the choice, and I followed it. I stood up from my chair at the table where Eli and I had been sitting with Clara on his knee, and I said, loud and steady, loud enough for the whole room, "I need to stop you right there." Miriam looked at me. The room looked at me. Clara, startled by the sudden quiet, looked around at everyone looking at me, and then went back to chewing on the ear of the stuffed rabbit she'd been carrying since morning. I took one breath and I said, "I appreciate that you love Clara, and I know you meant today as a gift. But what was just described is not what happened, and I'm not going to stand here and let that be the story." Miriam's expression shifted. The easy confidence flickered. "Ellie and I planned this party," I said. "We found this venue. We signed the contract. I chose the layout. I ordered the cake. My cake is the one on the display table over there." I gestured to where Kim had moved it, gold stand and all, back to the center of the room, because the cake you're all looking at was ordered without our knowledge. I have the venue contract on my phone right now with my name on it and my credit card on file. Kim, the coordinator here at Birchwood, has confirmed that the original arrangement was changed on Thursday by a phone call placed without our authorization. I paused. That is the truth of how today came together. The room was quiet. Not the uncomfortable quiet where people are cringing, more like the focused quiet of people who are listening, because something real is happening. "I also want to say," I continued, "because everyone here received one. Those programs were not something Eli or I made. I didn't know about them until 40 minutes ago." I held mine up briefly and set it back down. "I'm not trying to make a scene at my daughter's birthday. I'm saying this because every single person in this room showed up for us this year, and I'm not willing to have someone else receive credit for that in front of you." Eli stood up beside me. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder with me, and there was something in that, the quiet solidity of it, that said more than any speech would have. Then he looked at his mother and said, "Mom, this wasn't okay. None of it." Miriam looked at us. She looked at the room. "I was trying to do something beautiful for Clara," she said, her voice tighter now. "You two worked so hard, and I wanted her to have something truly special, something more than what we planned," I said. She stopped. "More than the 7 months of planning I put into today, the venue I found and booked and paid for, the cake I ordered from a bakery I drove 40 minutes to visit, the photos I printed, one for every month of her life." I kept my voice even. Not because I wasn't angry. I was, but because the facts didn't need my anger to be devastating on their own. "You decided what we built wasn't enough. And instead of saying that to our faces, you made phone calls we didn't know about, and showed up today, prepared to take credit for it." Bex stood up from her seat 2 chairs down. She does everything calmly, and the calm made it land harder. "I can confirm," she said, looking around the table, "that Phoebe planned this party. I was with her at the bakery when she ordered that cake. I helped her address the invitations in July. And I received a phone call from Miriam last Tuesday asking questions about the guest list that make a lot more sense to me now than they did then." She sat back down without another word. The room was very still. Miriam looked at me one more time. There was something real in her face underneath the defensiveness. She did love Clara. I believed that. I had never stopped believing that. But love isn't the same thing as a right, and I think some part of her had always confused the two. "I only wanted what was best for her," she said quietly, the public argument gone out of her voice. "I thought if you saw it, you'd understand." "You didn't think I'd understand before," I said, "so you didn't ask. You decided for me. And that's not what I wanted for my daughter's birthday. That's not what I want for my family. She didn't have an answer for that. I watched her search for one and come up empty. She picked up her program from the table in front of her and folded it in half once and put it into her purse. She said, "I think I need some air," in a voice that had gone very small. And then she walked past the decorated tables and through the patio door and into the garden, and this time she didn't come back. Eli's aunt, who had been sitting beside Miriam, quietly gathered the remaining programs from the side table, tucked them into the canvas tote Miriam had left behind, and set the tote near the door without a word. It was a small act, and it meant something. Kim appeared at the edge of the room. She met my eyes across the space. She walked directly to the tiered fondant cake Miriam had ordered, moved it to the far end of the table, and carried my cake. The pressed flour, buttercream, gold script cake on its thrifted and painted stand, back to the center of the display where it had always been meant to go. Someone started clapping. I don't know who started it, but others joined, and then it was just the sound of the people we loved. In the room we'd rented, at the party we'd built, and I had to press my knuckle against my mouth for a second to keep myself together. We lit the candle. Clara sat in the high chair we'd brought from home, hands already reaching for everything she wasn't supposed to touch, and Eli held her fingers gently away from the flame while 40 people sang to her. She stared at the candle with complete seriousness, the way she examined everything that confused or fascinated her, and when we leaned in to blow it out for her, she leaned with us, understanding something about the moment even if she couldn't name it. The flame went out. She laughed. The room laughed. The tension that had held the space for the last 20 minutes broke apart like something that had only been waiting for permission. We did the cake smash. Clara got buttercream in both eyebrows and seemed offended by the texture, and then interested in it, and then delighted by it, in that order, while the photographer captured all of it. We ate. We opened the few gifts people had brought. We watched Clara be passed between arms and held and kissed and marveled at by the people who'd been showing up for us since before she was born. Afterward, as guests came to find me, several of them pulled me aside with the particular quietness of people saying something they'd been waiting to say. Eli's aunt squeezed my arm and said she'd been sitting there for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to say something, and I had done it before she could find the words. A woman I'd known since college said she'd been in a version of this situation with her own mother-in-law for years, and she wished she'd had the clarity I'd had. Someone I barely knew, a colleague of Eli's who I'd met twice, simply said, "Good for you," and walked away, and that was its own kind of kindness. I told all of them the same thing. There was nothing for anyone in that room to apologize for. The only person who owed an explanation was the one who'd already left. We stayed until 3. We filled the small boxes with the sage-frosted cookies and handed them out at the door. The truck took 2 trips to load. When the last box was in the bed and Clara was buckled into her car seat, already asleep with her rabbit, I stood in the Birchwood parking lot in the afternoon, cold with my arms at my sides, and just breathed for a minute. Eli came and stood next to me. "We need to have a real conversation with her," he said. Not that night, but soon and for real, and with both of us saying what needed to be said. I knew. There was no part of me pretending otherwise. What had happened that morning was not the beginning of the story. It was the place the story had been building to for a while, one small comment at a time, one quiet certainty of Miriam's about how things should be done and who should be doing them. Whatever came next, whether it was a genuine reset or something slower and more deliberate, whether it broke something between us that didn't fully heal, none of it was going to be simple. But standing in that parking lot with Clara asleep in the back seat and buttercream still on my sleeve from the cake smash, I knew something true and solid. I had not smiled and let it go. I had not swallowed the story where someone else got the credit for the year I'd lived. I had stood up in a room full of people before I had time to lose my nerve, and I had told the truth out loud, and the people who mattered had heard it. My daughter's first birthday belongs to us. The planning, the flowers, the 12 months of middle-of-the-night feedings and rocking chair arithmetic, and watching a person I made become someone I couldn't have imagined. Miriam can love Clara without owning that. She can love me without rewriting what I've built. Eli took my hand. We got in the car and drove home through the October afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything look a little golden even when it isn't. And I thought, whatever still needs to happen, I know one thing for certain. I will not let someone else narrate the story of my family while I stand quietly in the back. Not that day and not ever again.